The sound came first, a single gunshot, sharp and clean, cutting through the morning silence like a blade through silk. Then a scream, high and desperate, the kind that tears the throat raw. And then, as suddenly as it began, nothing, only silence. The thick, suffocating silence that follows violence. Darkness, complete and absolute. Then, slowly, light. Flickering candlelight illuminating trembling hands. Hands covered in blood, dark and wet, gripping a small silver cross necklace that caught the firelight and threw it back in fractured pieces. The camera pulled back, revealing more. A young woman, 17, maybe 18. Apache. Her skin the color of canyon stone at dusk, her black hair matted with dirt and sweat falling across her face in tangled waves. Her eyes, dark as river stones, burned with something beyond fear, beyond rage, something older, something final. She stood in what had once been a mission church. The wooden pews were charred, half collapsed. The crucifix above the altar hung crooked, one arm broken, pointing accusingly at the floor. Ash covered everything like gray snow, and kneeling before her, clutching his shoulder where blood seeped between his fingers, was Reverend Josiah Pike. 52 years old, gray-haired, thin as a rail, wearing the black coat and white collar of his office. His pale blue eyes, usually so cold and certain, now held something they had not held in decades. Fear. Pike's voice cracked as he spoke, his breath coming in short gasps. "Child, you don't understand. I saved you. Everything I did to save you." The young woman's hand shook, but the small Derringer pistol she aimed at his chest never wavered. Her voice, when it came, was steady, too steady for someone so young. "You saved nothing. You took everything." Her finger tightened on the trigger. The screen went black. White letters appeared stark against the darkness. 6 weeks earlier. The high desert wind carried the smell of juniper and dust across the valley they called Red Creek, though the creek itself ran red only in memory now, stained by the blood of 100 small wars between cattlemen and farmers, settlers and the Apache who had lived here first, the government and everyone it deemed inconvenient. It was October 15th, 1878, and the wind promised winter, though the sun still beat down with summer's cruelty. Gideon Hart rode his horse Ash along the canyon's eastern edge, his body moving with the animal's rhythm as naturally as breathing. He was 41 years old, though the sun and wind had carved lines into his face that made him look older. Tall, 6'1", with shoulders broad enough to carry fence posts or the weight of 3 years of silence. His hair was dark brown, shot through with gray at the temples, usually hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His eyes were the color of winter ice, pale blue-gray, the kind of eyes that seemed to look through things rather than at them. He wore worn leather gloves, a faded blue workshirt, and trousers tucked into boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard country. Strapped to his saddle, catching the light as he rode, was something unusual. A small chalkboard slate, the kind school children used, tied with leather cords within easy reach. Ash, a gray gelding with a disposition as steady as stone, picked his way along the rocky trail without guidance. Gideon's attention was on the fence line that marked the southern boundary of his land. 200 acres of high desert valley, more rock than soil, but enough grass to keep cattle alive if you knew where to look for water. Movement caught his eye. A rider approaching from the direction of the ranch house, young, 19 or 20, sitting his horse with the eager awkwardness of someone still learning. Tobias, his ranch hand, the only employee Gideon had kept after Margaret died. Tobias reined in his sorrel mare, pushing his hat back. He had the kind of face that smiled easily, open and honest, or so it seemed. "Boss," he called, breathless. "Them cattle near the south pasture, they look sick. 3 of them ain't standing right. Want me to separate them out, or you want to have a look first?" Gideon pulled Ash to a stop. Without a word, he reached for the slate. The chalk made a soft scratching sound as he wrote, each letter precise and clear. When he finished, He turned the slate so Tobias could read it. Quarantine them. Burn the hay. Tobias nodded, but his smile faded slightly. He shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. Right, will do, boss. A pause. Then, as if he could not help himself, Mr. Hart, no offense, but folks in town been asking. Wondering, I guess. Why you don't just, talk. Doc Brennan, he said, your throat healed up fine after the accident 3 years back. Said there ain't no physical reason you can't. Gideon's eyes, already cold, went colder still. He stared at Tobias for a long moment. Long enough for the younger man to drop his gaze and fidget with his reins. Then, without acknowledging the question, Gideon touched his heels to Ash's sides and rode past, heading toward the southern pasture. Tobias watched him go, his expression troubled. When Gideon was 50 yards away, Tobias pulled a small notebook from his vest pocket. He glanced around, making sure he was alone, then quickly scribbled something. The camera held on his face just long enough to register the guilt there, the conflict, before he stuffed the notebook back and rode in the opposite direction. The southern pasture bordered the creek, or what passed for one. This time of year it was barely a trickle, winding through cottonwoods and willows that clung to its banks like desperate men to a rope. Gideon dismounted and ground tied Ash, then walked the fence line, checking for breaks, for signs of predators or thieves or simple decay. The silence was absolute except for the wind and the occasional call of a raven. He preferred it this way. Silence was honest. It made no promises it could not keep. He was a quarter-mile from where he had left Ash when he saw the buzzards, 3 of them, circling lazy spirals against the white-hot sky. Carrion birds, Death's advance scouts. Gideon's hand went to the Colt revolver at his hip, thumb on the hammer, though he did not draw. He moved toward the creek, toward where the buzzards marked their interest, his boots silent on the sandy soil. He found her where the creek bent, creating a shallow pool no deeper than a man's knee. At first, he thought she was dead. She lay half submerged, face down, one arm stretched out toward the far bank as if she had been trying to crawl to safety when strength failed her. Then he saw the chain, heavy iron links, the kind used for livestock, wrapped around her left ankle and secured to a wooden post driven deep into the creek bed. The post was fresh, the wood still pale where the bark had been stripped. Someone had chained her here deliberately. Someone had meant for her to die. Next to her, sprawled on his back in the shallow water, was a man. White. Mid-20s. He wore the blue uniform of the United States Cavalry, though the jacket was torn and soaked dark with blood. A gunshot wound, center chest. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, already glazed with death. Gideon moved closer, his shadow falling across the girl's body. That was when she moved, just barely. Her fingers twitched, clawing weakly at the sand. He knelt beside her, ignoring the water soaking into his pants. Carefully he turned her over. Apache, 17, maybe younger. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, lips cracked and bleeding. She wore the remnants of a cotton dress, once white, now brown with dried blood and creek mud. A gunshot wound in her left shoulder, poorly bandaged with torn cloth. Fever burned off her skin like heat from a stove. Her right hand was clenched in a fist. Gideon gently pried her fingers open. She was clutching a small brass pin, a cavalry insignia, the number 7 etched into the metal, from the dead soldier's uniform. For a long moment, Gideon did not move. He stared at the girl, and something moved behind his eyes, some memory rising from deep water. The camera pushed in close on his face, catching the pain there, the hesitation, the war between instinct and fear. A flash, brief, fragmented. Not quite a memory, more like the ghost of one. A woman's hand, pale-skinned, wearing a simple gold wedding band, reaching toward him. Blood on wooden floorboards, dark and spreading. His own voice, screaming a name he could no longer say, screaming until his throat tore and the world went silent. The flash ended. Gideon was back in the creek, the cold water numbing his legs, the dying girl in front of him. He made his choice. Moving quickly now, he pulled a folding knife from his belt and went to work on the chain. The links were too thick to cut, but where they attached to the iron cuff around her ankle, there was a bolt, rusted from creek water. He wedged the knife blade under it and pried. Once, twice. On the third try, the bolt snapped. The girl's eyes fluttered open as he lifted her, dark brown, nearly black, unfocused with fever. She made a sound, something between a whimper and a growl, and tried weakly to push him away. "Shh," Gideon breathed, so quietly it was barely sound at all. Not a word, just air. He carried her out of the creek. She weighed almost nothing, all bone and fever heat. As he passed the dead soldier, he paused long enough to close the man's eyes. A small mercy, the only one he could offer. Ash stood where Gideon had left him, patient as stone. Gideon settled the girl across the saddle, then mounted behind her, holding her upright with one arm. She had lost consciousness again, her head lolling against his chest. He turned the horse toward home. What he did not see, what the camera lingered on after he rode away, was the figure watching from the ridge above the creek. A man in a dark coat, face obscured by shadow and distance, holding a pair of binoculars. The figure watched Gideon ride north, then lowered the binoculars and pulled a small telegraph message pad from his coat pocket. He wrote quickly, in neat, precise letters. "Package located. Hart has her. Proceed as planned." He signed it with a single letter, T. The camera held on that letter, then cut to Tobias, back at the ranch, tying his horse to the corral fence. The brand on his saddle caught the light. The letter T burned into the leather. The stone cabin sat 200 yards from the main ranch house, built into the hillside like it had grown there. Gideon had built it himself 5 years ago, when he and Margaret first claimed this land. It was meant to be temporary, a place to live while they constructed the larger house. But after Margaret died, Gideon had moved back into the cabin and left the main house empty. Smaller space, fewer ghosts. He carried the girl inside and laid her on the bed, the only bed, a simple frame with a corn husk mattress. The cabin was one room, maybe 15 feet square. A stone fireplace took up most of one wall, a rough wooden table and 2 chairs, shelves holding tin plates, a coffee pot, canned goods, a rifle leaning in the corner by the door. Gideon built a fire, though the day was warm because he knew fever and he knew shock and he knew the cold that comes from blood loss. While the kindling caught, he fetched water from the pump outside, filled a basin, and found the cleanest cloth he had. The girl had not moved. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, her skin ashen beneath the brown. The gunshot wound in her shoulder had stopped bleeding, but infection had set in. He could smell it, sweet and rotten. He cut away the makeshift bandage and the ruined dress beneath, working with the clinical detachment of someone who had dressed wounds before. The bullet had gone through, entry and exit, both visible. That was good. Nothing to dig out. But the edges were angry red, hot to the touch. He cleaned the wound with water boiled and cooled, then packed it with clean cloth soaked in whiskey. The girl's eyes flew open when the alcohol hit the raw flesh, and she screamed, or tried to. What came out was a thin, broken sound, barely human. She tried to sit up, to fight, her good arm flailing weakly. Gideon caught her wrist, held it gently but firmly. "Easy," he said, and the word cost him. His voice was barely a whisper, rough as gravel, each syllable scraping his throat raw. "Easy." The girl stared at him, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. She said something in Apache, the words flowing like water, too fast for Gideon to catch individual meaning, though he recognized the language. Then, in broken English, heavily accented, "No, no, please, no more." Gideon released her wrist and stepped back, hands raised, palms out. Universal language. "I mean no harm." He pointed to the bowl of water, to the clean cloth, then to her shoulder. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his hand over his own heart and shook his head. The girl watched him, breathing hard. Her body coiled tight as a spring, but she did not try to run. Perhaps she knew she lacked the strength. Perhaps she saw something in his face, in his eyes, that told her this man was not like the others who had hurt her. Gideon moved to the table and picked up his slate. He wrote, then held it up so she could see, "You are safe. I will not hurt you." She stared at the words, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, her eyes moved from the slate to his face to the rifle in the corner. The rifle was close to her, closer than to him. He had placed it there deliberately, a gesture of trust, or a test. "Who?" she whispered, her English halting. "Who are you?" Gideon wrote again, "My name is Gideon Hart. This is my land. You are safe here." "Safe," she repeated, as if testing the word, seeing if it fit in her mouth. "Safe." Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed against the pillow, consciousness leaving her like water draining from a basin. Gideon covered her with a blanket, then sat in the chair by the window, his rifle across his knees, and waited for her to wake. She slept through the afternoon and into the night, fever dreams making her thrash and cry out. Twice she spoke, her voice rising in panic. The first time she cried Aita over and over, like a prayer or a curse. The second time, later, deeper in the fever, she said a different name. "Maria. My name is Maria." At that second name, Gideon went very still. He stood and walked to the bedside, looking down at the girl's face, slack with unconsciousness. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the silver cross necklace she wore, half hidden beneath the blanket. He had noticed it earlier, but had not examined it. Now he lifted it, careful not to wake her, and turned it in the firelight. It was small, delicate, real silver tarnished gray, and on the back, engraved in tiny, precise letters, he read, "To Maria, with love. M.H. 1870. M.H. Margaret Hart," his wife's initials. The cross slipped from his fingers as if it had burned him. He stepped back, his face gone white, and walked outside into the night, leaving the door open behind him. The moon was a thin crescent, barely enough light to see by. Gideon walked 50 yards from the cabin and stopped, his hands braced on his knees, breathing hard like he had been running. The camera stayed inside with the sleeping girl for a moment, then cut back to him, alone in the darkness. When he finally straightened, he looked older, tired. He pulled the slate from his belt, though there was no one to show it to, and wrote 4 words. His hand shook so badly the letters were barely legible. How is this possible? He stood there motionless, watching the words fade, staring at those words, before he erased them and walked back inside. Morning came cold and clear, the sun turning the eastern sky the color of old blood. The girl woke before Gideon, who had dozed in the chair, his rifle still across his lap. She was sitting up when he opened his eyes, the blanket pulled around her shoulders, watching him with the wary intensity of a wild animal. "Water," she said. Just that one word. Gideon rose, his back stiff from the awkward position, and poured water from the pitcher into a tin cup. He handed it to her and stepped back, giving her space. She drank it all in 4 long swallows, then held the cup out for more. He refilled it twice before she was satisfied. "Thank you," she said, her English careful, formal, as if she had learned it from a book rather than conversation. Gideon nodded. He took up his slate and wrote, "Can you tell me your name?" She looked at the question for a long moment, and something complicated moved across her face. Pain, confusion, something like grief. "Aita," she said finally. "It means first to dance, in my mother's tongue. Apache." Gideon wrote, "And the name Maria?" Her eyes went wide. "How do you know that name?" He pointed to the cross at her throat. She touched it reflexively, protectively. She hesitated, her brow furrowing. "I don't remember. Sometimes I think my name is Maria, sometimes Aita. Pike, he made me forget. He said Maria was dead. He said I was only Aita now." Gideon's hand froze on the slate. He wrote slowly, "Who is Pike?" "Reverend Pike," she said, and her voice went flat, all emotion draining from it. "He runs the mission, San Miguel. He takes children, Apache children, Mexican children, says he saves them, teaches them God and English and how to work. Her hands clenched in the blanket. But he doesn't save. He sells, like cattle. Gideon wrote, "How long were you with him?" "I don't know. Long time. Since I was small. Maybe 8 years old. I don't remember before. Only pieces. A woman. Red hair. She sang to me. She gave me this." She touched the cross again. "Then Pike's men came. They killed her. They took me." Gideon's breathing had gone shallow. His hand shook as he wrote the next question, but he had to know, what was the woman's name? Aida closed her eyes, searching for the memory, like a woman searching for something lost in dark water. "I don't remember, but the name on the cross, M.H. She said those were her letters. Her name began with M." Gideon stood abruptly, the chair scraping loud against the floor. He walked to the far side of the cabin, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. After a long silence, he turned. He wrote on the slate, each word deliberate, then held it up so she could read. Her name was Margaret. She was my wife. The silence that followed was absolute. Aida stared at the words, her lips moving as if repeating them soundlessly, trying to make them make sense. "Your wife," she whispered. "The woman with red hair was your wife?" Gideon nodded. "She died. Pike's men killed her." He nodded again. Aida looked down at the cross, then back at Gideon. "Why?" she asked, and it was not clear if she was asking why Margaret died, or why Margaret had given her the cross, or why Gideon had saved her, or all of these things at once. Gideon wrote, "She was helping Apache families, children, trying to get them away from Pike." He found out. The girl absorbed this, her face very still. Then softly, "I remember now. Not all of it, but some. She was taking us somewhere, 5 of us, children, to the border, Mexico. She said we would be safe there. Then men came, men with guns. She told us to run. I ran, I hid in the rocks, I heard shooting. I heard her scream." A pause. "I heard a man scream too, screaming her name, Margaret, over and over, until the screaming stopped." Gideon turned away again, his hand pressed flat against the stone wall. "That was you," Aida said. "You were the man screaming." He did not answer, could not answer. The memory was too large, too sharp, still capable of cutting him even after 3 years. After a long moment, Aida spoke again, her voice gentler. "Pike found me 3 days later. He said Margaret was dead. He said if I told anyone what happened, he would kill the other children. So I stayed silent. I became Aida. I forgot Maria." Gideon wrote, his letters hard and angry on the slate. "How did you escape?" "A soldier, Corporal Wade. He was new. He saw what Pike was doing. He said it was wrong. Illegal. He said he would help me get away, that he had proof, that he would take it to the marshal." She looked down at her hands. 3 nights ago we ran. Pike's men came after us. They shot Wade. He made me keep running. I got to the creek before they caught me. They chained me there, said Pike would come for me in the morning. But Wade must have shot one of them before he died because they left. Maybe to get help. Maybe just scared." She looked up at Gideon. "Then you came." He wrote, "The soldier, Wade. He is dead." "I know," she said softly. "I felt it when you found me. He was holding my hand. Then his hand went cold." They sat in silence as the morning light grew stronger, filling the cabin with gold. 2 people bound by the ghost of a woman who had tried to save children and paid for it with her life. Finally, Gideon wrote, "You cannot go back to Pike. I know. You cannot stay here. If Pike knows I have you, he will come. I know that too." Then, after a pause, "What will you do?" Aida met his eyes, and in them Gideon saw something he recognized. The look of someone who had lost everything and found, in that loss, a terrible freedom. "I will find out who I am," she said. "Maria or Aida or something else. And then I will make Pike answer for what he did. To me, to the others, to your wife." Gideon stared at her, unmoving. This girl, who was barely more than a child, who spoke of vengeance with the calm certainty of someone twice her age. Then he nodded once, slowly. He wrote, "Then we find the truth together." That afternoon, Gideon rode into town. Red Creek was barely large enough to call a town. One main street, dirt and rutted, lined with false front buildings that looked like stage sets. General store, saloon, livery stable, assayer's office, and a small sheriff's station with a wooden sign that read, "Sheriff D. Webb," in faded black paint. Gideon had left Aida at the cabin with the rifle and instructions written on his slate. Trust no one. If anyone comes, hide. She had nodded, her face serious, understanding the gravity. He tied Ash to the hitching post outside the general store and went inside. The store was dim after the bright sunlight, smelling of coffee and leather and pickles. The proprietor, a round man named Hoskins, looked up from his ledger and his smile died. "Mr. Hart," he said, his tone careful, neutral. "What can I do for you?" Gideon handed him a list written on paper. Bandages. Whiskey for medicine, not drinking, the note specified. Laudanum, if you have it. Tinned food. Coffee. Salt pork. Hoskins read the list, his eyebrows climbing. "That's a lot of medical supplies. You hurt?" Gideon shook his head. He wrote on his slate, "Ranch hand." Cut himself. Badly. It was a lie, but a plausible one. Hoskins nodded and began gathering the items. While he worked, Gideon walked to the back of the store where newspapers from Santa Fe and Denver were stacked. He scanned the front pages, looking for any mention of a missing soldier, a dead corporal, anything about Pike or the mission. Nothing, as if Wade had never existed. He was about to leave when the door opened and Sheriff Dalton Webb walked in. Webb was 55, his face weathered to the texture of old saddle leather, gray stubble on his jaw. He wore a star pinned to a vest that had seen better days, and his gun belt rode low on his hips, the holster worn smooth from years of draw practice that had never been needed in a town as quiet as Red Creek. Webb saw Gideon and stopped. For a moment neither man moved. Then Webb nodded, a small, tight gesture, and walked to the counter. "Hart?" he said. Not friendly, but not hostile either. Complicated. Gideon nodded back. Webb pulled a piece of paper from his vest pocket and handed it to Hoskins. "Need to post this. Official notice from the Territorial Marshal's office." Hoskins took it and pinned it to the board by the door where wanted posters and sale notices hung. Gideon glanced at it. Missing person, reward. And beneath, a description. Female, approximately 17 years of age. Apache, possibly using the name Maria Cortez. Last seen in the vicinity of Mission San Miguel. Information leading to recovery should be reported to Reverend J. Pike. Gideon's jaw tightened. He looked at Webb. The sheriff was watching him, his expression unreadable. Webb stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "Hart, I need to talk to you. Private." Gideon gestured to the door. They walked outside together, leaving Hoskins to finish gathering supplies. Once they were on the boardwalk, out of earshot, Webb pulled out a small notebook and pencil and wrote, "Is she at your place?" Gideon stared at the question. Then, slowly, he took the pencil and wrote beneath it. "How do you know?" Webb wrote, "Because I was there. The night Margaret died. I know what she was doing. I know why." He looked up, meeting Gideon's eyes. In them, Gideon saw guilt. Old and deep and never quite healed. Webb wrote again. "Pike sent that notice this morning. He claims the girl is his legal ward. Says she ran away with a soldier who kidnapped her. Says the soldier is dead, shot trying to escape. He's got federal papers, guardianship, signed by a judge." Gideon's hand shook as he wrote, "She is not his. He bought her, sold others. She was one of the children Margaret tried to save." Webb read this and closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he wrote, "I believe you, but believing and proving are different. If Pike comes with federal papers, I can't stop him. Not legally." Gideon grabbed the pencil and wrote hard, the lead nearly breaking. "Then illegally." Webb looked at him for a long moment. Then he wrote, 3 years ago, I made a choice. I let Pike go. I let him buy his way out. I took his money. Every day since, I've regretted it. I won't make that mistake again. But we need proof, real proof. Documents, witnesses, something that will make a federal judge listen. Gideon wrote, where do we find it? Webb wrote, Pike's office. At the mission. He keeps records. He's too arrogant not to. But the mission is 50 miles south. Well guarded, we'd need help. Before Gideon could respond, the door to the saloon across the street opened and a woman stepped out. She was 42, though hard living made her look older. Her hair was black, streaked with silver, pulled back severe. A scar ran from her left eyebrow to her cheekbone, white against brown skin. Mexican or Spanish, Gideon thought. She wore a simple dress, dark blue, and an apron stained with what might have been wine or blood. She saw them and went very still. Her eyes locked on Gideon, then dropped to the silver cross visible at his throat, where he wore it on a leather cord, having taken it from Aita that morning to examine it more closely in the light. The woman crossed the street, moving fast, her skirts kicking up dust. She stopped in front of Gideon and stared at the cross, her face gone pale beneath the brown. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her accent thick. "That was Margaret's. I would know it anywhere." Gideon and Webb exchanged a glance. Webb wrote quickly, "This is Rosa Marine. She owns the saloon. She and Margaret were close." Rosa reached out and touched the cross with one finger, reverent. "Dios mío, she wore this every day. Where did you find it?" Gideon hesitated, then wrote on Webb's notebook, "A girl, Apache. Margaret gave it to her before she died." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "The children, the ones Margaret was trying to save, is one of them still alive?" Gideon nodded. Rosa gripped his arm, her fingers digging in hard. "Where is she? Is she safe?" Gideon wrote, "Safe. For now. But Pike is looking for her." Rosa's face hardened. The tears dried as if they had never been. "Pike," she spat the name like poison. "That man is the devil in a collar. He took me too, 10 years ago. I was 16. He bought me from a brothel in El Paso, said he would save my soul. Instead, he sold me to work copper mines in the hills. I would have died there if not for a cavalry raid. A soldier helped me escape. Corporal Wade." Gideon went very still. He wrote, "Wade is dead, killed 3 nights ago, helping the girl escape." Rosa closed her eyes. "Of course. Pike kills anyone who threatens him. He has friends, powerful friends, in the cavalry, in the government, men who use his missions to hide their crimes." She looked at both men, her jaw set. "I will help you. Whatever you need. I owe Margaret, I owe Wade, and I owe myself." Webb wrote, "We need Pike's records, proof of what he is doing. Can you get inside the mission?" Rosa shook her head. "Not without being recognized, but I know someone who can, someone Pike trusts." She looked at Gideon. "Do you trust your ranch hand, Tobias?" Gideon's expression went flat. He wrote, "Why?" Rosa said, "Because I have seen him, talking to a man in a dark coat, taking money. I thought nothing of it then, but now," she paused. "If Pike is watching you, he would need eyes close to you, someone you trust." The world seemed to tilt beneath Gideon's feet. He thought of Tobias, the questions about why he did not speak, the notebook he pulled out when he thought no one was watching. He wrote his letters sharp and angry. "When did you see this?" "This morning. An hour ago, in the alley behind my saloon." Gideon turned and walked to Ash without another word. He mounted and rode, not toward home, but toward the small line shack on the eastern edge of his property, where Tobias sometimes stayed when working the far pastures. The shack was empty when Gideon arrived, but Tobias's saddlebags were there. Gideon did not hesitate. He opened them and searched. In the bottom of the left bag, wrapped in oilcloth, he found it. A notebook, small, leather-bound. Inside, in Tobias's careful handwriting, were notes, dates, times, movements. Hart rode south to check fences. Hart brought a girl to the cabin. Girl is Apache, matches Pike's description. And at the bottom of the most recent page, an address, telegraph office, Santa Fe, and a name, Captain R. Vance, 7th Cavalry. Gideon was still standing there, the notebook in his hand, when he heard the horse approach. He turned. Tobias rode up and dismounted, saw Gideon holding the notebook, and went white. "Mr. Hart," he stammered, "I can explain." For the first time in 3 years, Gideon spoke, one word. His voice was a ruined thing, hoarse and broken, barely more than a whisper. But it was clear enough. "Traitor." Tobias flinched as if struck. "Please, please, boss, you don't understand. He has my sister, Captain Vance. He has Lucy. He said if I didn't tell him what you were doing, he would kill her. I had no choice. I swear I had no choice." Gideon stared at him. Then he pulled out his slate and wrote, his hand shaking with rage, "Who is Vance? He's Pike's partner. They've been working together for years. Vance uses his position to move the children Pike takes, sells them to mines, ranches, brothels, anyone who pays. He threatened me 6 months ago. Said if I didn't watch you, report on you, he would hurt Lucy. She's only 14, Mr. Hart. She's all I got." Gideon wrote, "Where is she?" "At the mission, with Pike. I've been trying to get her out, I swear. But they watch her, use her to keep me in line." Gideon looked at the younger man for a long moment. Tobias was crying now, his face twisted with shame and fear. Finally Gideon wrote, "You are coming with us to save your sister, and then you are gone." Tobias nodded, relief and terror mixing on his face. "Yes, sir, anything. Thank you." They rode back to the ranch together in silence. When they arrived, Gideon went straight to the stone cabin. Aita was sitting on the porch, the rifle across her knees, watching them approach with eyes that missed nothing. Gideon dismounted and wrote quickly, "This is Tobias. He has been spying on us for Pike's partner, but his sister is prisoner at the mission. He will help us get her out and get proof of what Pike has done." Aita stood slowly, the rifle pointed not quite at Tobias, but not quite away either. "Can we trust him?" Gideon wrote, "We have no choice. We have 12 days before Pike comes with a federal marshal. We need those records before then." She studied Tobias, who would not meet her eyes. Finally she nodded. "Then we plan." That night they gathered at the ranch. Gideon, Aita, Webb, Rosa, and Tobias. 5 people with different reasons to hate Pike, united by necessity and the memory of those he had destroyed. Rosa spread a hand-drawn map of Mission San Miguel on the table. "The mission is built like a fort. Stone walls, 1 main gate, guards. But there are tunnels, old mining tunnels from before Pike bought the land. They connect to the mission basement. That is how I escaped." Webb pointed to a building on the map. "Pike's office is here, 2nd floor. If we go during Sunday service, most of the guards will be in the chapel, but we will need someone to get us inside the tunnels." Tobias spoke quietly. "I can do that. Vance trusts me, or he thinks he does. I can tell him I have information. Get him to let me in, then I can open the tunnel entrance from inside." Aita looked at Gideon. "And you? What will you do?" Gideon wrote, "I will get the records, and I will make sure Pike answers for Margaret." His hand was steady as he wrote it, but his eyes were not. They burned with something cold and final. The planning went late into the night. When the others had left, only Gideon and Aita remained, sitting on the porch of the stone cabin, watching the stars wheel overhead in their ancient paths. Aita spoke first, her voice soft. "You loved her, Margaret." It was not a question, but Gideon nodded anyway. "Tell me about her." He hesitated, then wrote on his slate, the chalk scratching in the darkness. "She had red hair, green eyes. She laughed easily. She saw good in everyone, even when they did not deserve it." "What happened to her the night she died?" Gideon's hand stilled. For a long moment he did not write. Then, "She went to help the children. I told her not to go. I said it was too dangerous. We fought. She went anyway. When I heard the shooting, I rode after her. I was too late. She was already dying. I held her. I screamed her name. I screamed until I had no voice left. But she did not answer. She never answered again. Aida reached out and took his hand. Not romantically, just human contact. Comfort. "I am sorry," she said. They sat like that for a long time, two damaged people under an indifferent sky, holding on to each other like shipwreck survivors to driftwood. Finally, Aida spoke again. "If we do not come back tomorrow, if Pike wins, I want you to know, you gave me something I had forgotten. You gave me my name back. Maria and Aida, both. You made me remember I am a person, not property. For that I thank you." Gideon looked at her. Then he wrote, his letters, careful and clear. "If we do not come back, it will be because I died keeping you safe." And that would be enough. Aida smiled, small and sad. "You are a good man, Gideon Hart." He shook his head and wrote, "No, just a man trying to do better than he did before." She squeezed his hand once more, then stood. "I should sleep. Tomorrow will be hard." Gideon nodded. She started toward the cabin door, then stopped and turned back. "Gideon, when this is over, when we are safe, will you teach me to read and write properly? Not just a little, but everything." He wrote, "Yes, good," she said, and then softer, "Good night." "Good night," he whispered, the words costing him, but worth the cost. She went inside. Gideon stayed on the porch, staring at the darkness, at the place where the road disappeared into shadow. Somewhere out there, Pike was waiting. Vance was waiting. Men with guns and power and no conscience were waiting. But Gideon had something they did not. He had a reason, not just revenge, though that was part of it, but something more. He had a second chance to save someone Margaret had died trying to protect. And this time he would not fail. He pulled his Colt from its holster and checked the cylinder. 6 rounds. He had killed men before, during the war, when he wore blue and fought for the Union. He had told himself then it was duty, necessity. But the truth was simpler and harder. He had killed because he was good at it. Because something in him went cold and certain when violence was required. That coldness was back now. He could feel it settling over him like snow. And tomorrow, when they rode for the mission, when they faced Pike and his men, Gideon would let that coldness have its way. He holstered the gun and went inside. Aida was already asleep, curled on the bed. Gideon took the chair by the fire, his rifle across his knees, and waited for dawn. Tomorrow, the reckoning would begin. Dawn came cold and sharp, the sun bleeding red across the eastern horizon like a wound in the sky. Gideon woke to find Aida already up, standing at the cabin window, staring out at the ranch with the intensity of someone memorizing a place they might never see again. She had braided her hair tight against her scalp in the Apache way, practical for what was coming. She wore pants Gideon had given her, too large and cinched with rope, and one of Margaret's old shirts, faded blue cotton that hung loose on her thin frame. At her hip, a gun belt, also Margaret's, holding the small revolver Gideon had cleaned and loaded the night before. She looked older than 17, or perhaps younger. It was hard to say. Violence aged people in strange ways, adding years to the eyes while leaving the face untouched. "I have been thinking," she said, without turning from the window, "about what happens after. If we survive. If we get the proof. Pike will hang, yes, or go to prison. But there are others like him. Other missions. Other children. What happens to them?" Gideon stood and moved to the table. He poured coffee from the pot kept warm on the stove, handed her a cup, then wrote on his slate, "We cannot save everyone." "I know," she said, taking the coffee but not drinking it, "but we can save some. We can tell their stories. Make people see." She turned to look at him. "Will you help me do that? After?" He wrote, "Yes." The single word seemed to satisfy her. She nodded and finally drank, wincing at the bitter heat. They ate a cold breakfast of hardtack and jerky because there was no time for more. While they ate, Tobias arrived, his face drawn and pale from a sleepless night. Behind him came Sheriff Webb and Rosa, both armed, both wearing the grim expressions of people who had made peace with violence. Webb spread the map on the table one more time. "The plan is simple. Tobias goes in first, tells Vance He has urgent information about Hart's movements. That gets him inside. He opens the tunnel entrance in the old chapel basement at exactly noon. The rest of us enter through the tunnels. Rosa leads because she knows the way. We split into two groups. Rosa and I go for the records in Pike's office. Gideon and Aita go for Lucy, Tobias's sister. We meet back at the tunnel entrance in 30 minutes, no longer. If someone is not there, we leave without them. And if we are discovered? Aita asked. Webb's jaw tightened. Then we fight our way out, but we try not to kill unless we have no choice. Dead men bring federal marshals asking questions we cannot answer. Gideon wrote, "What about Pike?" Pike will be in the chapel during service, leading prayers. We avoid him if possible. Our goal is evidence, not revenge. Gideon stared at the words, then slowly erased them. He did not write what he was thinking. That some men deserved more than prison. That some debts could only be paid in blood. They rode out an hour later, 5 riders on a road that wound south through high desert country, the land empty and vast under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The mission appeared first as a dark shape on the horizon, growing larger as they approached. Mission San Miguel, built of adobe and stone, its walls thick and high, designed more like a fortress than a house of God. A bell tower rose above the main gate, and Gideon could see armed men walking the walls, not monks or priests, guards, hired guns. They stopped 2 miles out, in a dry wash hidden from the mission by a low ridge. This was as far as they could go together. From here, Tobias would ride alone. The young man dismounted, his hands shaking as he checked his saddle, adjusted his hat, did all the small nervous things people do when they are terrified. Gideon touched his shoulder, waited until Tobias met his eyes, then wrote, "Your sister will be free today. I promise." Tobias nodded, not trusting his voice. Then he mounted and rode toward the mission, his back straight, trying to look confident, though every line of his body screamed fear. The others waited in tense silence. Rosa checked her knife, a wicked blade with a worn handle that had seen use. Webb cleaned his glasses, a nervous habit. Aida sat very still, her eyes closed, lips moving in what might have been prayer, or might have been something older, some Apache ritual Gideon did not know. Gideon himself felt the familiar coldness settling deeper. His heartbeat slowed, his breathing steadied. This was the calm that came before violence, the same calm he had felt at Shiloh, at Antietam, at a dozen battlefields whose names he had tried to forget. He had hated it then. He welcomed it now. 30 minutes passed, then 45. Webb pulled out his pocket watch, checked it, frowned. He should have signaled by now. The signal was simple. If Tobias succeeded in opening the tunnel entrance, he would light a lantern and place it in the bell tower window. They could see the tower from here with Webb's field glasses. No light appeared. "Something is wrong," Rosa said. Gideon took the field glasses and looked. He could see the guards on the walls, see people moving in the courtyard, see the chapel where smoke rose from a chimney, but no light in the tower. Then he saw something else. The main gate opening, riders coming out, 6 of them, cavalry. And in the center, hands bound, being dragged behind a horse, was Tobias. "Dios mío," Rosa whispered. They watched as the riders stopped 100 yards from the gate. One man dismounted, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a captain's insignia. Even from this distance, Gideon could see the cruelty in how he moved, the casual violence in how he yanked Tobias to his feet. The captain pulled Tobias's head back by his hair and shouted something toward the wash where Gideon and the others hid. His voice carried on the wind, faint but clear. "Hart, I know you are out there. I know you can hear me. Captain Robert Vance, 7th Cavalry. You have something that belongs to Reverend Pike. A girl. You will return her by sunset, or I will hang your man here, and then I will come for you." He released Tobias, who collapsed to his knees. Vance drew his pistol, pressed it to the back of Tobias's head. "You have until the sun touches the horizon, not 1 minute more." Then he mounted, and the riders turned back toward the mission, dragging Tobias with them. The gate closed. Silence in the wash. Then Webb spoke, his voice tight. It was a trap. They knew we were coming. How? Rosa demanded. Webb looked at Gideon. Does anyone else know about this? Anyone you told? Gideon shook his head. He had told no one. But then he thought of yesterday, of his trip to town, of the supplies he bought, of people who might have been watching. Aida stood abruptly. It does not matter how. What matters is they have Tobias, and they want me. You cannot go, Rosa said. If you go, Pike wins. He gets you back, and we have nothing. And if I do not go, Tobias dies, and his sister stays a prisoner. Webb shook his head. We stick to the plan. We find another way in. The tunnels are still there. Rosa can guide us. We get the records, we get the girl, and we get out. And Tobias? Aida asked. Webb said nothing. The answer was clear in his silence. Tobias was already dead. They just had not buried him yet. Gideon watched Aida's face, saw the war happening behind her eyes, the calculation, the weighing of one life against many, the impossible mathematics of survival. Then she turned to him. What would Margaret do? The question hit like a fist. Gideon closed his eyes, and he could see her, his wife, red hair catching sunlight, green eyes fierce. She would have ridden straight through those gates. She would have offered herself in exchange. She would have chosen mercy over strategy, heart over head, every single time. And it had killed her. He opened his eyes and wrote, Margaret would save him, and it would be foolish and brave and right. Aida smiled, small and sad. Then I will be foolish too. No, Webb started. But she cut him off. I am not asking permission, Sheriff. I am telling you what I will do. I will ride to that gate. I will offer myself in exchange for Tobias. And while they are distracted with me, you three will enter through the tunnels, get the records, get Lucy, and get out. Then you will use those records to destroy Pike and Vance both. They will kill you, Rosa said flatly. Maybe, but maybe not. Pike wants me alive. He went to too much trouble finding me to kill me quickly. That gives you time. Gideon grabbed her arm, spun her to face him. He wrote furiously, No, I will not let you do this. You do not have a choice, she said gently. This is mine to make. She pulled free and walked to her horse. Gideon followed, still writing, There is another way. There is always another way. Name it, she said, mounting. He could not. She was right. This was the only play that made sense, and he hated it. She looked down at him from the saddle. Gideon Hart, you saved my life once. Now I am saving Tobias's. We are even. Not even, he whispered, the words tearing his throat. Not close. Then save me back, she said. Get those records. Finish what Margaret started. She turned her horse toward the mission. Gideon stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to stop her, to drag her off that horse, to lock her in the cabin and keep her safe. But he had tried that with Margaret. He had begged her not to go, and she had gone anyway because it was right, and he had lost her. He would not make the same mistake twice. He let Aida ride. She approached the mission gate at a walk, her hands raised, no weapon visible. The guards on the wall shouted down at her. She stopped 20 feet from the gate and called out, her voice clear and strong. My name is Aida. Some call me Maria Cortez. I am the one Reverend Pike seeks. I have come to offer an exchange. Me for the man you hold. Tobias. Let him go, and I will come peacefully. For a long moment, nothing. Then the gate opened, and Captain Vance rode out, flanked by 4 soldiers. He stopped his horse in front of Aida and looked her up and down like a man appraising livestock. So, the lost lamb returns. His voice was rough, a lifetime of whiskey and cigars in every word. Reverend Pike will be pleased. Do we have an agreement, me for Tobias? Vance smiled. It was not a kind expression. We have whatever I say we have, girl. He gestured to his men. 2 of them rode forward, grabbed Aida by the arms, and dragged her from her horse. She did not fight, did not resist. Just let them bind her hands and put a rope around her neck like she was a dog. Then Vance gestured again, and another soldier rode out from the gate, pushing Tobias ahead of him. Tobias's face was bloody, one eye swollen shut. They had beaten him, but he was alive. "There," Vance said. "Your exchange. Now get out of here before I change my mind and keep you both." Tobias stumbled forward, fell to his knees, looked up at Aita with horror and gratitude and shame all mixed together. "No," he managed. "You should not have." "Tell Gideon I expect him to keep his promise," she said. Then the soldiers pulled her toward the gate. Vance leaned down from his saddle as they passed. "You know, girl, Pike wants you alive, but he did not say unmarked. I think we might have some fun with you before we hand you over. Payment for all the trouble you caused." Aita spat in his face. Vance's expression went cold. He backhanded her hard enough to snap her head to the side, hard enough to split her lip. "Yes," he said softly, "we will definitely have fun." Then they dragged her through the gate, and it closed behind them. In the wash, Gideon watched through the field glasses. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold them steady. The coldness inside him was gone, burned away by a rage so pure and hot it felt like being set on fire. Webb put a hand on his shoulder. "We move now, while they are occupied with her. It is what she wanted." Gideon lowered the glasses. His face was blank, emotionless, but his eyes were terrible. He wrote on his slate, the chalk digging deep gouges, "I will kill Vance, Pike too. I will kill them all." "First we get the proof," Webb said. "Then you can have your vengeance." They helped Tobias onto a horse. He was in bad shape, barely conscious, but he could ride. Rosa led them east, circling wide around the mission to where the old mining tunnels opened into a hillside half a mile away. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind scrub brush and fallen rocks, easy to miss unless you knew where to look. Rosa moved the rocks aside, revealing a gap barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "The tunnels are old," she warned, "unstable in places. Stay close, do not wander, and do not make noise. Sound carries." They entered one by one. Gideon went last, pausing at the entrance to look back toward the mission. Somewhere inside those walls, Aida was alone, surrounded by men who meant her harm. He had failed Margaret. He would not fail Aida. He ducked into the tunnel and let the darkness swallow him. The air underground was cold and damp, smelling of earth and decay. Rosa led with a small lantern, its light barely pushing back the shadows. The tunnel was narrow, the ceiling low, forcing them to move in single file, hunched and awkward. They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The tunnel branched and forked, a maze of passages carved by men long dead in search of silver that had never existed in quantities worth the digging. Finally, Rosa stopped at a section of wall that looked like solid rock, but was actually a hidden door, clever stonework that blended seamlessly. She pressed on a specific stone, and a section swung inward, revealing a small chamber. "This was the old chapel," she whispered, "before Pike rebuilt. The new mission is above us. Pike's office is 2 floors up, east wing. The dormitories where they keep the children are west wing. Lucy will be there." Webb nodded. "Rosa and I go for the office. Gideon, you get Lucy. Tobias, you stay here. You are in no shape to fight." "No," Tobias said, his voice thick with pain but determined. "Lucy is my sister. I am coming." Gideon looked at him, then nodded. He wrote, "Stay behind me. Do what I say." They split up. Webb and Rosa disappeared up a narrow staircase carved into the stone. Gideon and Tobias went the opposite direction, following Rosa's directions through a passage that opened into a basement storage room. The room was full of crates and barrels, supplies for the mission. Gideon moved through them silently, his gun drawn, Tobias limping behind. A door at the far end led to stairs. They climbed. The first floor was administrative, empty offices, a kitchen, a dining hall, no people. Everyone was at Sunday service in the chapel. Gideon could hear singing, faint and distant. Hymns sung in Spanish and English and Apache, the voices of children blending with adults in forced harmony. They climbed to the second floor, the west wing, a long hallway lined with doors, dormitories. Through one door, Gideon could hear crying, soft and muffled. He tried the handle, locked. He stepped back and kicked. The door sprang open, the lock splintering. Inside, a room with 6 narrow beds. 5 were empty. On the 6th, a girl, maybe 14, dark-haired, thin as a rail, wearing a gray dress that was more sack than clothing. She looked up, terrified, then saw Tobias, and her eyes went wide. "Lucy," Tobias breathed. She threw herself at him, and he caught her, and they clung to each other, both crying now, a reunion that was equal parts joy and grief. Gideon let them have their moment. Then he touched Tobias's shoulder and wrote, "We must go, now." They moved back toward the stairs, but as they reached them, voices drifted up from below. Guards, 2 of them, talking and laughing. Gideon held up a hand. "Stop." He peered down the stairwell. The guards were at the bottom, blocking the only exit. He looked at Tobias and Lucy, then wrote quickly, "Find another way down. I will distract them." "How?" Tobias whispered. Gideon did not answer. He simply walked down the stairs, his boots loud and deliberate on the wood. The guards looked up, saw him, and their laughter died. "Who are you? This area is restricted." Gideon said nothing, just kept walking toward them. "I said stop," one guard barked, his hand going to his gun. Gideon's draw was faster. 2 shots, so close together they sounded like one. Both guards went down, one grabbing his leg where Gideon had shot him, the other clutching his shoulder. Not kill shots. Disabling shots. As Webb had asked, but the sound would carry. They had perhaps 2 minutes before the whole mission came running. He turned back up the stairs, but Tobias and Lucy were already gone, heading for another exit Rosa had mentioned. Smart. Gideon ran the opposite direction, leading pursuit away from them. Behind him, he heard shouting, boots pounding, the mission coming alive like a kicked hornet's nest. He burst through a side door into a courtyard. Wrong choice. The courtyard was enclosed, walls on 3 sides, the chapel on the 4th. And between him and the chapel, blocking his escape, stood Reverend Josiah Pike. Pike was smaller than Gideon expected, thin, almost frail, his black coat hanging loose on narrow shoulders. But his eyes were bright and sharp, the eyes of a man who believed absolutely in his own righteousness. "Mr. Hart," Pike said, his voice calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "I have heard much about you, the silent rancher, the man who lost his wife to her own foolish compassion." Gideon raised his gun, aimed it at Pike's chest. Pike smiled. "You will not shoot me. Not here. Not in the house of God. You may be many things, Mr. Hart, but you are not a murderer." Gideon's finger tightened on the trigger. Pike was wrong. He was exactly a murderer. He had killed at Shiloh. He would kill now. But before he could fire, something hard struck the back of his head. Pain exploded white and bright. His legs gave out. The gun fell from his hand. The world tilted and darkened. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was Pike's face, leaning close, whispering, "Now we have them all." Then nothing. Gideon woke to cold water thrown in his face. He gasped, choking, and tried to move but could not. His hands were bound behind him, tied to a chair. His head throbbed where he had been struck, a sharp pulsing pain that made his vision swim. He blinked, trying to focus. He was in a room he did not recognize. Small, stone walls, a single window with bars, a cell, and he was not alone. Aida sat across from him, also bound to a chair. Her face was bruised, her lips still bleeding from where Vance had struck her. But her eyes were clear and fierce and unbroken. "Welcome back," she said. "You have been asleep for an hour." Gideon tried to speak but managed only a croak. Aida understood anyway. "Tobias and Lucy got out. I saw them from the window before they brought me here. Webb and Rosa too. They made it to the tunnels with something, papers maybe, so we did not fail completely." A door opened. Captain Vance entered, followed by 2 soldiers and Pike. Vance looked pleased with himself, the cat that caught both mice. "Well now," Vance said, "this is a nice reunion. The girl who ran, the man who hid her, both right where they belong." Pike moved to stand in front of Aita. "Maria, my dear lost child, do you know how long I have searched for you? 8 years. 8 years you have been gone from God's grace." "My name," Aita said, her voice hard, "is Aita." "Your name is whatever I say it is," Pike snapped, his calm cracking slightly. "I bought you. I saved you from a life of savagery. I gave you purpose. And you repaid me by running, by seducing a good soldier into sin. Corporal Wade is dead because of you. Wade is dead because your men shot him." Pike's hand lashed out, striking her across the face. "Do not speak, unless spoken to." Gideon lunged against his bonds, a growl rising from his throat. Vance laughed and hit him, a casual backhand that split Gideon's cheek. "Easy there, Hart, you will get your turn." Pike turned to Vance. "The sheriff and the Mexican woman who were with them, they escaped?" "For now. But they are on foot in open country with no horses. My men will run them down by nightfall." "And the records they stole from my office?" Vance's smile faded. "What records?" Pike's face went white. "My ledgers, my correspondence, they are gone. The office was ransacked." For the first time, Vance looked worried. "Those records could hang us both." "Then find them," Pike hissed. "Find them and burn them, and kill anyone who has seen them." Vance nodded and left, shouting orders to his men. Pike turned back to Aita and Gideon. "This is your fault," he said, his voice shaking now, the veneer of control cracking wider. "All of it. I have spent 10 years building this mission, 10 years saving children, and you ungrateful wretches, you would destroy it all." "You did not save anyone," Aita said quietly. "You sold them, like cattle." Pike's hand went to his pocket, pulled out a small pistol, a Derringer, nickel-plated and deadly at close range. He pointed it at Aita's head. "I should kill you now," he whispered. "I should end this." "Then do it," she said, not flinching. "But you will not, because you need me. You need to break me, to prove your God is stronger than my spirit. That is what this has always been about. Not salvation. Control." Pike stared at her. Then slowly he lowered the gun. "You are right. I will not kill you, not yet. First I will make you watch while I kill him." He turned the gun toward Gideon. Gideon met his eyes and did not look away. "Any last words, Mr. Hart?" "Oh, that is right. You have no words. How fitting. The man who screamed his wife's name until his voice broke, dying in silence." Gideon thought of Margaret, of Aita, of all the things he had wanted to say and never could. Then he opened his mouth and spoke. Not a whisper, not a croak, but clear and strong and full of all the rage and grief and love he had carried for 3 years. "Go to hell." The shock on Pike's face would have been funny if the moment were not so deadly serious. The gun wavered. Pike's finger tightened on the trigger, and then the wall exploded. The explosion tore through the stone wall like the fist of an angry god, showering the cell with chunks of adobe and mortar. The concussion knocked Pike off his feet, sent him sprawling backward, the Derringer flying from his hand and skittering across the floor into the rubble. Gideon's ears rang, a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. Through the dust and smoke he saw figures pouring through the breach in the wall. Sheriff Webb, his shotgun raised. Rosa, a rifle in her hands and murder in her eyes. And behind them, a dozen men from town, ranchers, store owners, men who had stayed silent when Pike took children, but who had reached some invisible line they would not cross. Webb fired once into the ceiling, the blast enormous in the confined space. "Nobody move. Pike, you are under arrest." Pike scrambled to his feet, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You have no authority here, Webb. This is federal land, church property. You are the one breaking the law." "I have all the authority I need," Webb said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Federal warrant signed by the territorial marshal in Santa Fe 2 hours ago, charging you and Captain Vance with human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 20 other crimes I cannot pronounce. While Gideon had faced Pike in the courtyard below, while Aida sat bound in the cell waiting for rescue or death, Webb and Rosa had moved through the mission's upper floors like ghosts. Rosa's hands, steady despite the chaos erupting around them, worked the lock on Pike's office door with a bent hairpin she had carried for exactly this purpose. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside, the room was meticulous. Too meticulous. Every paper filed, every ledger labeled, in Pike's precise hand. A man who believed his work was holy kept records, like a man who believed history would vindicate him. "There," Rosa breathed, pointing to a heavy metal lockbox beneath the desk, partially hidden by the Reverend's black coat draped over a chair. Webb did not hesitate. He smashed the lock open with his rifle butt, the sound covered by distant shouting and the thunder of horses in the courtyard. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth as if they were sacred texts, lay the ledgers, names, dates, prices paid, 8 years of evidence in Pike's own meticulous handwriting. Webb flipped one open. His face went pale. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered. "There are hundreds. Children, women, some sold to mines, some to ranches, some to—" He could not finish. Rosa's jaw tightened. "Take them, all of them." They heard footsteps pounding up the stairs. Vance's men, alerted by the noise. "Go," Webb hissed, shoving the ledgers into Rosa's arms. "Get to the tunnel. Get these to the marshal. I will hold them here." Rosa hesitated for one heartbeat. Then she ran, clutching the evidence to her chest like a mother clutching a child, and did not look back. Behind her, Webb's shotgun roared once, twice, and men screamed. She made it to the tunnel entrance just as Tobias and Lucy emerged, bleeding and terrified, but alive. Together, they fled through the darkness, carrying the proof that would hang Pike and destroy Vance. Rosa moved to Aida, cutting her bonds with quick, efficient movements. Then she freed Gideon, who stood on shaking legs, his head still swimming from the blow he had taken. "How?" he rasped, his newly reclaimed voice rough, words barely audible as broken glass. "Tobias and Lucy," Webb explained, keeping his shotgun trained on Pike. "They rode hard for town, got there in half the time it should have taken. Brought us back here with Rosa's tunnel map and enough explosive powder to make an entrance." He smiled grimly. Rosa remembered where the cells were. She spent time in one herself. Pike was backing toward the door, his hands raised, his eyes darting for an escape route. "This is a mistake, a terrible mistake. I have friends, powerful friends. You cannot do this." "Your friends are under arrest too," Webb said. "Captain Vance was detained by actual federal cavalry an hour ago. Seems when the territorial marshal saw your ledgers, the letters between you and Vance detailing exactly how you bought and sold children, he sent a whole company to round up everyone involved." The color drained from Pike's face. "The ledgers, you cannot have them. I destroyed them." Rosa laughed, cold and sharp. "You destroyed the copies you kept in your office, but you did not destroy the originals. The ones you kept in the chapel, hidden behind the altar, wrapped in oilcloth like they were holy scripture." She spat on the floor. "We found them. Every name, every transaction, every child you stole. 8 years of evidence." Pike lunged for the door, but 2 ranchers grabbed him, slammed him against the wall. He struggled, screaming now, all pretense of dignity gone. "You do not understand. I saved them. I gave them purpose. God commanded me. God himself commanded me to bring light to the darkness." Gideon walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate. His hands were free now, and they curled into fists. When he reached Pike, he leaned in close, his ice-blue eyes boring into the Reverend's. "God," Gideon said, his voice low and terrible, "did not command you to do anything. You are not a prophet. You are not a savior. You are a slaver, a coward. A man who hurt children and called it holy." Pike tried to spit at him, but Gideon caught him by the throat, not squeezing, just holding him still. "I loved my wife. She died because of you, because she tried to save children from what you did to them. I have spent 3 years in silence, drowning in grief. But I am done being silent, and you are done hurting people." He released Pike and stepped back. "Sheriff, get him out of my sight before I forget the law exists." Webb nodded to the ranchers, who dragged Pike toward the door. The Reverend was still screaming, quoting scripture now, his voice rising in desperate prayer. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." "The valley of the shadow of death," Rosa said quietly, watching him go. "That is where you belong, Pike, in the shadow." The screaming faded as they took him away. Silence settled over the cell, broken only by the sound of falling dust and distant shouting as Webb's men secured the mission. Aida touched Gideon's arm. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, though the back of his skull throbbed and his face ached where Vance had struck him. "Are you?" "I have been hurt worse," she said simply. Then softer, "You spoke. I heard you. You told Pike to go to hell." "I did. And before that, when he was going to shoot you, you said something." Gideon looked at her, this girl who was not quite a girl anymore, who had walked into a trap to save a man she barely knew, who had faced Pike without flinching. "I said what needed saying." She smiled, small and tired. "It is good to hear your voice." Webb returned, his expression grim. "We have a problem. Vance is not in custody. The cavalry unit that was supposed to arrest him, they were his men, loyal to him. They let him go." "Where is he now?" Gideon asked. "Unknown. But he will run. Without Pike, without the mission, he has nothing. He will head for Mexico, probably. Try to disappear." Rosa shook her head. Men like Vance do not disappear quietly. They burn things on the way out. She looked at Gideon. "Your ranch. It is isolated. Easy target, if Vance wants revenge." Gideon's blood went cold. He had left the ranch undefended, except for 2 hired hands, neither of them fighters. If Vance rode there with his men, there would be nothing to stop them from burning it to the ground. "I have to go," he said, already moving toward the breach in the wall. "Wait," Webb called. "You cannot face Vance alone." "I will not be alone," Gideon said, glancing back at Aida. She was already checking the revolver at her hip, her face set with determination. "No," she said, "you will not." They rode hard, pushing the horses to the edge of endurance, racing the sun as it crawled toward the western horizon. Gideon on Ash, Aida on a bay mare borrowed from the mission stables. Behind them, Webb and 4 armed men followed, but they were slower, their horses carrying more weight. The land blurred past, red earth and scrub brush and scattered juniper. Gideon's mind raced faster than the horse beneath him. If Vance reached the ranch first, if he took his anger out on the 2 hands who worked there, on the land itself, Gideon would never forgive himself. The ranch was all he had left of Margaret, the cabin they had built together, the dreams they had shared. Losing it would be like losing her all over again. Aida rode beside him, her braid streaming behind her, her face fierce with concentration. She had tied the skirt of her dress up to ride astride, and she handled the horse like someone born to the saddle. "What is the plan?" she shouted over the thunder of hooves. "Get there before Vance," Gideon shouted back. "Fortify the cabin. Hold until Webb arrives." "And if we are too late?" He did not answer. There was no good answer. They crested the ridge overlooking Red Creek Valley just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. And there, in the distance, Gideon saw smoke, thin gray smoke, rising from the direction of the ranch. "No," he breathed. Then louder, kicking Ash into a full gallop. "No!" They raced down the ridge, sliding and scrambling on loose rock, the horses snorting with effort. As they got closer, Gideon could see the source of the smoke. Not the main house, not the cabin, the barn. The barn was burning. Flames licking up the wooden walls, consuming hay and timber. And in front of the cabin, 6 men on horseback, cavalry uniforms, led by Captain Robert Vance, who sat his horse with casual arrogance, a torch in one hand. Vance saw them coming and smiled. He raised his voice, calling across the distance. "Hart, right on time. I was just about to burn your house down. Seemed only fair since you burned my life down." Gideon reined Ash to a halt 50 feet away, Aida beside him. He could see the two ranch hands bound and on their knees near the corral. Alive. That was something. "Let them go, Vance," Gideon said, his voice carrying clear and strong. "This is between you and me." "Oh, I do not think so," Vance said. "See, I lost everything today. My position, my income, my future. All because of you and that girl." He pointed the torch at Aida. "Pike was weak. He wanted to save her soul. I just want her dead." He gestured to his men. 3 of them raised rifles, aiming at Aida. Gideon moved without thinking, spurring Ash forward, putting himself between the rifles and Aida. "No," Vance laughed. "Touching. The silent man finds his voice just in time to die." How poetic. "You will not touch her," Gideon said. "And how do you plan to stop me? You are 1 man. I have 6. "He has 2, Aida said, her revolver clearing its holster in a smooth draw. "And more coming." As if summoned by her words, riders appeared on the ridge. Webb and his men, still distant, but closing fast. Vance saw them, and his smile faded. "Shoot them," he ordered his men. "Shoot them both." But his men hesitated. They were soldiers, not murderers. Shooting an unarmed reverend was one thing. Shooting a man and a girl in front of witnesses, in front of a sheriff, was another. That hesitation cost Vance everything. Gideon drew his Colt and fired, not at Vance, but at the soldier closest to him. The shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Aida fired twice, her smaller revolver barking sharp reports. One shot went wide. The other hit a soldier's horse, sending it bucking and screaming. Chaos erupted. Vance's men scattered, some dismounting to return fire, others wheeling their horses to flee. Gideon and Aida dove from their saddles, using the horses as cover, firing carefully, conserving ammunition. A bullet whined past Gideon's ear, close enough to feel the heat. He returned fire, hitting another soldier in the leg. The man went down, cursing and clutching the wound. Aida's gun clicked empty. She ducked behind her horse, hands shaking as she tried to reload. Gideon moved to cover her, firing twice more, driving Vance's men back. Then Webb arrived, his shotgun roaring, and suddenly it was over. 3 of Vance's men were down, wounded but alive. 2 more had their hands raised in surrender, and Vance himself sat frozen on his horse, Webb's shotgun pointed directly at his chest. "Captain Vance," Webb said, breathing hard, "you are under arrest for attempted murder, arson, and being a general pain in my backside." Vance stared at him, then at Gideon, then at the burning barn. Something broke behind his eyes. He dropped the torch and reached for his sidearm. Gideon saw it happening, saw the desperate rage in Vance's face, knew what was coming. "Webb, down!" Webb dropped flat. Vance's gun cleared leather, swinging toward Gideon. Gideon fired first. Center mass. The way he had been trained. The way that ended things. Vance jerked backward, the gun falling from his hand. He swayed in the saddle for a long moment, his eyes wide with surprise, then toppled sideways and hit the ground and did not move. Silence, broken only by the crackle of flames from the barn and the heavy breathing of exhausted men and horses. Gideon walked to Vance's body, his gun still raised, and checked for a pulse. Nothing. He holstered the Colt and closed his eyes, feeling the weight of it settle over him. He had killed before. But never like this, never someone looking him in the eye. Aida appeared at his side, her hand slipping into his. "You had no choice." "I know," he said, but knowing did not make it easier. Webb organized his men to put out the barn fire and secure Vance's soldiers. The ranch hands were cut free, shaken but unharmed, and as the sun finally slipped below the horizon, painting the valley in twilight blue, Gideon stood with Aida and looked at what remained. The barn was a total loss, collapsed into smoking ruins. But the cabin stood. The house stood. The land endured. "It is over," Aida said quietly. "Yes," Gideon agreed. "It is over." Movement at the edge of the ranch caught Gideon's attention. 2 figures on foot emerging from the tree line where the road bent toward town. Tobias, limping but upright, his arm around a thin girl with dark hair who moved like someone who had forgotten how to walk without fear. Lucy. They had made it out through the tunnels with Rosa and the Ledgers, then hidden in the rocks until the fighting ended. Now they approached slowly, Lucy's eyes darting everywhere, looking for threats that were no longer there. Aida saw them and went still. For a moment the two girls just looked at each other across the smoky yard. Both survivors of Pike's mission. Both marked by what had been done to them. Both free but carrying scars that would never fully heal. Lucy stopped 10 feet away, her thin body trembling. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "You came back." Aida took a step forward. "What?" "You came back," Lucy repeated, louder now, her eyes welling with tears. "Pike said no one ever came back. He said once you ran, you stayed gone, that you forgot about the ones left behind, but you came back." Understanding dawned on Aida's face. "You remember me, from before, from when we were children." Lucy nodded, tears spilling over. "You were older. You protected us, the younger ones. You took our beatings when we were too small, and then you were gone and I thought—" her voice broke, "I thought you abandoned us." Aida crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled Lucy into her arms. The younger girl collapsed against her, sobbing. 8 years of fear and loneliness pouring out in great shaking waves. "I did not abandon you," Aida said fiercely, her own eyes wet. "I was taken, sold. I tried to get back. I tried to remember. But Pike made me forget so much. But I am here now, and you are free. We are both free." Gideon watched them, throat tight. Tobias stood beside him, his battered face wet with tears. "Thank you," Tobias said quietly, "for everything, for saving her, for giving me the chance to get her out." Gideon just nodded, not trusting his voice. Lucy pulled back from Aida, wiping her face with shaking hands. She looked at Gideon, this tall, silent man who had stormed a mission to free children he did not know. "Are you the rancher, the one who saved Aida?" "He is," Aida answered for him. Lucy walked to Gideon and, before he could react, hugged him. She was so thin he could feel every rib, so fragile he was afraid to hug back for fear of breaking her. But she clung to him with surprising strength. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for not leaving us behind." Gideon's arms came up slowly, carefully, and he held her, just held her. This child who was not his child but who needed, in that moment, to be held by someone who would not hurt her. When she finally stepped back, Gideon pulled out his slate and wrote, "You are safe now, both of you, for as long as you need." Lucy read it and nodded, something like hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in 8 years. That night, all 5 of them, Gideon, Aida, Tobias, Lucy, and Rosa, who had ridden back from town with the marshal's men, sat around the fire in the stone cabin. They did not talk much. There was too much to say and not enough words to say it. But they were together. Survivors, a family built not from blood but from shared trauma, and the choice to keep living despite it. Lucy fell asleep leaning against Aida's shoulder. Aida stroked her hair absently, her eyes distant, remembering the little girl Lucy had been, the children they had both been before Pike stole their childhoods. "She can stay," Gideon wrote on his slate, showing it to Tobias. "Both of you, until you find work, find your feet." Tobias's eyes filled again. "I will earn my keep. I will work. I will not be a burden." Gideon shook his head and wrote, "You are not a burden. You are family." The word hung in the air. Family. A strange family, a broken family, but family nonetheless. 3 days later, Gideon stood in the Red Creek Cemetery, hat in hand, staring at a grave he had visited 1,000 times before. Margaret's grave. The wooden cross was weathered gray, the name carved into it almost invisible now. Beside him, Aida stood silent, her head bowed. "I brought someone to meet you," Gideon said to the grave, his voice soft. "This is Aida, Maria Elena Cortez, one of the children you died saving." The wind rustled through the dry grass, the only sound. "She is alive because of you," Gideon continued. "Pike is in custody because of you. The children are free because of you. I thought you should know. I thought you should know it was not for nothing." He pulled the silver cross from his pocket, the one Margaret had given Aida 8 years ago. He had cleaned it, polished it until it shone. He knelt and placed it on the grave, nestling it against the wooden cross. "I miss you," he whispered, "every day. But I am not drowning anymore. I can breathe, and I think, maybe, you would be glad of that." He stood and stepped back. Aida moved forward and knelt where he had been. She touched the grave gently, almost reverently. "Thank you," she said to the earth, "for saving me, for giving me Gideon, for showing me that some people choose to be good even when it costs them everything." She paused. "I will try to be like you. I will try to make your sacrifice never matter." They stood there together for a long time, two people learning how to carry grief without being crushed by it, learning that remembering the dead did not mean forgetting how to live. Finally, Gideon touched Aida's shoulder. "Come, we should go." They walked back to where Ash was tied, waiting patient as stone. As Gideon mounted, Aida hesitated. "What happens now?" she asked. "Pike is arrested. Vance is dead. The mission is closed, but I have nowhere to go, no family, no home." Gideon looked down at her. This girl who had faced horrors and emerged unbroken, who had walked into danger to save a stranger, who had reminded him that courage and compassion were not weaknesses, but strengths. "You have a home," he said. "If you want it, the ranch. It is not much, but it is yours, for as long as you want it." "And you?" she asked. "What do you want?" He thought about it, really thought. What did he want? For 3 years, he had wanted nothing but silence and solitude, and to be left alone with his grief. But Aida had changed that. She had dragged him back into the world, back into caring, back into speaking. "I want to finish what Margaret started," he said finally. "There are other missions, other children. I want to find them, help them, and I want you with me, if you are willing." Aida smiled, genuine and bright. "I am willing." Gideon held out his hand. She took it and he pulled her up behind him on the saddle. They rode back toward the ranch together, the setting sun at their backs, the valley spread out before them in shades of gold and amber. 6 months passed. Winter came and went, harsh but survivable. The trial of Reverend Josiah Pike made headlines across the territory. The evidence was overwhelming. The ledgers, the testimony of Rosa, and dozens of other survivors, the bodies found buried on mission grounds. Pike was sentenced to hang, but the night before his execution, he was found dead in his cell. Some said it was suicide. Others whispered that someone with access had helped him along. Sheriff Webb investigated but found nothing conclusive. Gideon suspected Rosa, but he never asked. Some questions were better left unanswered. The mission was sold. The money went to a fund for the children Pike had stolen, to help them find families, to give them a chance at normal lives. Lucy, Tobias's sister, stayed at the ranch for a month before Tobias found work on a ranch in Colorado and took her there. Before they left, Lucy hugged Aida and whispered, "Thank you for saving my brother." "He saved me too," Aida replied. Webb remained sheriff, but spent most of his time working with territorial authorities to shut down other trafficking operations. He found 3 more in his first year. He would find more. Rosa expanded her saloon into a boarding house, a place where women escaping bad situations could stay, no questions asked. She hired a lawyer, a fierce woman from Santa Fe, to help them navigate the legal system. Together they became a force that even judges had to respect. And at Red Creek Ranch, Gideon and Aida settled into a new rhythm, a new life. Gideon taught her to read and write properly this time, working through books by lantern light in the evenings. She learned fast, hungry for knowledge. Within 3 months, she was reading newspapers. Within 6, she was writing letters to other Apache families, trying to locate any relatives who might have survived. She taught him Apache, the language slow and difficult for his English tongue, but beautiful in its precision. She taught him the songs her mother had sung, the stories her father's people told. She taught him that silence was not always heavy, that sometimes it was simply peace. They rebuilt the barn together, stronger than before. They bought cattle. They planted a garden. They argued about small things and laughed about smaller ones. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's ghosts, each other's hopes. It was not romance, not yet. Perhaps it never would be. The gap between them was too wide in some ways. Age, culture, experience. But it was partnership. It was family. And that was more than either of them had dared hope for. One evening in late spring, Gideon found Aida on the porch of the stone cabin staring at a letter. Her face was unreadable. "What is it?" he asked, his voice now almost normal, the hoarseness fading with use. She held up the letter. "It is from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They found him. My father, Chief Kicking Bird. He is alive. He lives on a reservation in Arizona, and he wants to meet me." Gideon's heart clenched. This was the moment he had known would come. The moment when Aida would have to choose between the life she was building here and the family she had lost. "What do you want to do?" he asked carefully. She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "I want to go to see him, to know him. He is my father. But I also want to come back. This is my home now. You are my family now. Can both things be true?" Relief flooded through him so strong it made him lightheaded. "Yes," he said, "both things can be true. Will you come with me to meet him?" "If you want me to, I do." So they planned a trip. They would leave in 2 weeks, travel to Arizona, meet Chief Kicking Bird, and whatever happened there, whatever Aida decided, Gideon would support her. Because that was what family did. The night before they were to leave, Gideon could not sleep. He sat on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead, thinking about the strange path his life had taken. 3 years ago he had been a dead man walking, silent, broken, lost in grief so deep he could not see daylight. Now he was alive, healing, speaking, building something new from the ruins of what he had lost. Margaret had done that. Her death had seemed meaningless at the time, a waste of a good life. But it had saved Aida, and Aida had saved him. Perhaps that was what Margaret would have wanted, for the grief to become something else, something that grew instead of destroyed. The cabin door opened. Aida stepped out wrapped in a blanket against the spring chill. She sat beside him without speaking, and they watched the stars together. Finally she broke the silence. "Are you afraid of meeting my father?" "A little," Gideon admitted. "He may hate me, white man who took in his daughter. He may think I had no right. And if he does, then I will tell him the truth, that I found you dying, that I gave you a choice, that you chose to stay. And if that is not enough for him, then at least I can say I tried." Aida nodded slowly. "I am afraid too. What if he does not want me? What if I am too different now? Too white?" Gideon turned to look at her. "You are not too anything. You are exactly who you need to be. Apache and Mexican and yourself. Anyone who cannot see that is a fool." She smiled. "You always know what to say." "Not always, but I am learning." They sat in comfortable silence until the cold drove them inside. Gideon banked the fire while Aida prepared for bed. As he turned to leave to give her privacy, she called his name. "Gideon?" He turned back. "Whatever happens in Arizona, whatever my father says, I want you to know. I choose this. I choose you. This ranch. This life. You are my family. That will not change." His throat tightened. He managed a nod, not trusting his voice. She smiled and closed the door to her small room. Gideon stood there for a moment, then walked outside one more time. He looked up at the stars, at the vast indifferent sky, and he thought of Margaret. He thought of all the words he had never said to her, all the things he had kept locked inside. He would not make that mistake again. "Thank you," he said to the night, to the memory, to the woman he had loved and lost, "for teaching me that silence is sometimes necessary, but that speaking is how we stay alive." The wind carried his words away into the darkness, and somewhere, in the spaces between stars, he liked to think she heard them. The journey to Arizona took 2 weeks. They traveled by train for the first leg, then by wagon, then on horseback through country that grew hotter and drier the farther south they went. Aida was quiet for most of the trip, withdrawn into herself, nervous about what they would find. Chief Kicking Bird lived on the San Carlos Reservation, a piece of land the government had deemed sufficient for people whose ancestors had roamed an entire territory. It was a hard place, dry, poor, but the people endured. They found Kicking Bird outside a small adobe house, working a patch of struggling corn. He was 70, his face lined deep as canyon walls, his hair white as desert snow. But his eyes were sharp, and when he saw Aida, he went very still. She dismounted slowly, approached cautiously, like someone approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Grandfather," she said in Apache, the formal greeting for an elder. Kicking Bird stared at her. Then, in a voice rough with age and emotion, he replied in the same language, "You have your mother's eyes." Aida's breath caught. "You remember her?" "Every day. Elena. She was the sun. And when she died giving birth to you, the world went dark." "I am sorry," Aida whispered. "No." Kicking Bird stepped forward, took her face in his weathered hands. "You are not sorry. You are alive. That is what matters. I gave you to the white woman, the one with red hair, because I thought she could keep you safe, and then I heard she had died, and I thought you had died too." Tears ran down Aida's face. "I lived. She saved me. And then he saved me." She gestured to Gideon, who had hung back, giving them space. Kicking Bird looked at Gideon, his expression unreadable. "You are the rancher, the one who killed the bad men." "I am," Gideon said. "You took my daughter into your home." "I did." "Why?" It was a simple question, but the answer was not simple. Gideon thought about it, searching for truth. "Because I found her dying, and because leaving her to die would have dishonored the woman I loved, the woman who gave her life trying to save her." Kicking Bird considered this. Then slowly he nodded. "You speak truth. I see it in your eyes. You have known loss, you understand." He turned back to Aida. "Will you stay here, with your people?" Aida looked at the reservation, at the small houses, at the Apache families moving through their daily routines under the weight of government rules and broken promises. Then she looked at Gideon. "This is where I was born," she said carefully. "But it is not where I belong. Not now. I have a home, with him, at Red Creek." Kicking Bird's expression flickered with pain, but he nodded. "Then you will go, but you will visit. You will remember who you are, where you came from." "I will," Aida promised. "And you will visit us, see where I live, meet the people who care for me." "I will do this," Kicking Bird agreed. They stayed 3 days. Kicking Bird taught Aida the stories of her mother, of her Apache grandmother, of the lineage she carried. He taught her songs and showed her how to weave baskets in the old way. And on the last night, he sat with Gideon by a fire and spoke plainly. "She loves you," Kicking Bird said. "Not as a father, not yet as a man, but as something in between. You understand this?" "I do," Gideon said. "You will care for her, protect her, with my life. And when she grows older, when she becomes a woman and wants more than a ranch and an old man's company?" Gideon met his eyes. "Then I will help her find it, whatever she wants, whoever she wants to be. I will help her become that." Kicking Bird studied him, silent and measuring. Then he extended his hand. Gideon took it. They shook, a pact between two men who had both lost women they loved, who both understood the weight of protecting someone who had already survived too much. When they left, Aida cried, but they were good tears, healing tears. They returned to Red Creek Ranch in early summer. The valley was green, fed by late spring rains. The cattle had multiplied. The garden was thriving. It looked like home. Aida dismounted and stood in the yard, turning slowly, taking it all in. "I missed this," she said, surprised. "I missed home." Gideon smiled. "Welcome back." That evening found them in the garden Aida had planted, her hands deep in soil, Gideon repairing the fence beside her. No words passed between them, but their rhythm matched. Two people who had learned that silence could be companionship instead of loneliness. Aida leaned against Gideon's shoulder, comfortable and easy. "What now?" she asked. "Now we live," Gideon said simply. "We build. We help where we can. We honor the dead by making sure their deaths meant something. That is a good plan. It is the only plan I have." Aida laughed, the sound light and free. "Then it is enough." They sat in silence as darkness fell, and the stars emerged, one by one, ancient and unchanging. And in that silence, Gideon felt something he had not felt in years. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but something close, something that might grow into happiness if given time and care and patience. Hope. He had hope. And for a man who had lived 3 years in the shadow of death, who had lost his voice and his will and his wife, hope was a miracle. Beside him, Aida stirred. "Gideon?" "Yes?" "Thank you for everything, for saving me, for giving me a home, for helping me find my father, for all of it." He put his arm around her shoulders, pulled her close. "You pulled me back from the edge, Aida, and I gave you a place to stand." She nodded against his chest. "Yes, we did." Above them the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Below them the valley slept, peaceful and quiet. And in the stone cabin on Red Creek Ranch, 2 people who had been broken began slowly to make themselves whole, not by forgetting the past, not by pretending the scars did not exist, but by choosing every day to build something new from the ruins of what had been, together. The end came not with thunder, but with whispers, with small moments that accumulated into a life. Gideon teaching Aida to shoot straight, her laughter when she finally hit the target. Aida teaching Gideon to dance the Apache way, his awkward steps making her giggle. Long rides across the valley, checking fences, talking about everything and nothing. Evenings on the porch, reading aloud from books, building a shared world of stories. Kicking birds' visits twice a year, bringing news from the reservation and taking back news from the ranch. Letters from Rosa, detailing her work, asking for advice, offering friendship across the miles. Webb stopping by when his duties brought him near, sharing a drink, sharing silence, sharing the bond of men who had fought side by side. And slowly, so slowly Gideon barely noticed it happening, the space between him and Aida began to shift. She was 17 when they met, 18 when they traveled to Arizona, 19 when she started looking at him differently, when casual touches lingered a moment longer than necessary, when silence became charged with something unspoken. He was 41, then 42, old enough to know better, old enough to know that what was growing between them was dangerous, complicated, wrong by most measures, but also inevitable. One night, a year and a half after they had first met, Aida came to him where he sat by the fire. She did not ask. She simply took his hand and said, "I am not a child anymore." "I know," he said. "And what we have, it is more than friendship." "Yes." "Then why do we pretend otherwise?" He looked at her, this woman who had been a girl, who had survived horrors, who had chosen him when she could have chosen anything. "Because I am afraid," he admitted, "of failing you, of becoming something you regret." She knelt in front of him, took his face in her hands. "Gideon Hart, you have never failed me, not once, and you never will, because you see me not as property, not as a project, but as a person, as myself. That is all I have ever wanted." "Aida." "I love you," she said simply. "I have loved you since the day you found me dying and chose to save me when you did not have to. I loved you when you gave me space to heal. I loved you when you helped me find my father. I love you now, and I will love you tomorrow. That is my choice, mine, no one else's." His heart, that organ he had thought dead for so long, cracked open. "I love you too," he whispered. "God help me, I do." She smiled and kissed him, and the world, which had been gray for so long, blazed suddenly into color. They married quietly a year later, when Aida turned 20 and no one could question her choice. Sheriff Webb officiated. Rosa stood witness. Kicking Bird gave his blessing, traveling all the way from Arizona to place his hand on theirs and say, "You have my daughter's heart. Guard it well." "I will," Gideon promised, and he did. Years passed. The ranch prospered. They took in children sometimes, runaways and orphans, gave them a safe place until better homes could be found. They worked with territorial authorities to shut down the last of Pike's network, saving dozens more from his fate. Aida became known as a fierce advocate, speaking at town meetings, writing letters to newspapers, refusing to let the world forget what had been done. Gideon found his voice, not just literally, but figuratively. He spoke at trials. He testified. He used the weight of his experience to tip scales toward justice. Together, they built a life that honored the dead by serving the living. And when they were old, when Gideon's hair was white and Aida's black hair was shot through with silver, when the ranch had passed to younger hands, but they still lived in the stone cabin where it all began, they would sit on the porch and remember. Remember Margaret. Remember the children they had saved. Remember the battles they had fought. And they would hold hands, these two unlikely survivors, and watch the sun set over Red Creek Valley, and know that their story, born in blood and silence, had become something else. A story of redemption, of healing, of love that grew in the darkest soil and bloomed anyway. And that, Gideon thought, as Aida leaned her head on his shoulder and the stars began to emerge, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The end.